Welcome to the 2024 IEEE Online Forum on Climate Change Technologies, and thank you for joining. And I would like to remind you to mute the lines and switch off your videos if you are not presenting. And copies of the presentation will not be shared, but you can check it back later on our website and for the recordings of each sessions. And if you have any questions or comments, please just put it in the chat. And over to you, Ronnie.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation to address IEEE at this forum on climate change technologies, and I hope to find areas of overlap, foster better collaboration between science, technology, and professions such as mine that put research into practice and focus on technology to do so. I'm Ronnie Siegel, and I'll focus my talk on nature-based solutions, the use of natural processes of photosynthesis and ecosystems to preserve, restore, design, and manage terrestrial Earth to mitigate climate change. I'll focus mainly in my area of expertise as a landscape architect on Earth's man-made landscapes, at land developed for human habitation, but I'll point out the importance of preserving natural lands as well. So as a landscape architect for the last 40 years, I've designed school campuses, parks, streetscapes, children's play environments, and more, where I focused on sustainable design. Currently, I'm on the Biodiversity and Climate Action Committee of the American Society for Landscape Architects and the U.S. Green Building Council of California, where I am a member and organizer of their annual conference, Nature-Based Solutions tracks. And I also wrote a guide with Jared Green and Katie Riddle to help businesses get their operations to net zero. It's a very helpful tool that the ASLA freely shares to anyone. The link is at the bottom of the slide if you want to use it. But when putting this guide together, we realized that reducing emissions to net zero in our landscape projects and sequestering CO2 in the post-construction timeline had more potential to solve the climate crisis than our office operations impact. So I think the same is true for many engineers working on this challenge, and landscape architects were originally, even when I was trained in the 1970s and 80s, thought to be architects of the built landscapes. But now we know that first and foremost, we're stewards of the land and can play an integral collaborative role with engineers and scientists in addressing climate change. So I'm sure you know this chart by now. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change sets goals for yearly emissions of greenhouse gas of CO2 to drop to zero by 2050, as well as removing historically accumulated CO2 in the atmosphere to keep a cap on warming to 1.2 degrees Celsius. Without removing these past emissions, we might take many centuries to have it cleared on their own, during which time warming will continue and we'll have to adapt to that as well. So CDR, carbon dioxide removal, can be achieved in many ways with engineering, chemical methods like direct air capture, or artificially enhancing the capacity of the oceans to capture carbon. There were many really good talks in November at this forum about those techniques, and using nature-based solutions. However, the process of photosynthesis and enhancing the capability of the land to sequester carbon in the soil and biomass is currently the least expensive and most readily available method to remove CO2. However, to meet the IPCC timeline that we have, all methods must be explored. So nature-based solutions, not only are they relatively inexpensive and readily available compared to other CDR methods, they have multiple benefits, and here are some of them. So one solution can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, can remove CO2 from the air, can help us adapt to climate change effects, and increase biodiversity with additional economic benefits, improving human health, mental and physical, improving human experience and community well-being, increasing food security and water quality and availability, and an investment in nature-based solutions generally has high economic returns. So now, when we look at opportunities, we're in these four, then let me just go back one. These four, I'm going to focus the talk on the four largest bubbles, and you'll see these dots linked to case study categories that I'll be talking about later, and how each of these categories of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, removing CO2, adapting to climate change, and increasing biodiversity gets addressed in various solutions in case studies. But we can look at where the potential for nature-based solutions is on the Earth. So 29%, according to our World in Data, of the Earth is land. The rest is ocean. And out of the land, the 29% land, 71% is habitable. And the rest is desert, sand dunes, exposed rock, glaciers. Of course, this number is going to be fluctuating over time. And when we talk about man-made landscapes on the Earth, I was shocked to find that so far man has taken the habitable land and removed 50% of it of natural ecosystems for the benefit of agriculture, and 1% for urban areas, and has a hand in degrading the 37% of forests and the 11% of shrublands and 1% of freshwater lakes and rivers, with roadways, buildings, infrastructure, mining, pollution of air and groundwater, and other land disturbances causing ecological degradation. So one recent scientific study showed that the Earth is losing its natural ability to sequester carbon. Could this be because of how we take care of the land, or because of climate change effects, or both? We hope to get more data on this. In the meantime, we see more wildfires burning productive forest carbon sinks, flooding and storms eroding land and removing productive vegetation and soil carbon, increases in heat reducing biomass growth, and increasingly clearing of forests for crop production, emitting CO2. So I'm going to start with the first category of removing greenhouse gas emissions. This chart, it shows the greenhouse gas emissions by sectors. And in the pie chart, you can see in green the land use sector. So nature-based solutions really needs to address this. But at the same time, we can also address many of the other sectors as well. And I'll show examples of that. So to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with nature-based solutions in the electric sector, electricity, I'm just giving a few examples. Using green roofs can better insulate buildings, and planting street trees and urban forests can lower heat, saving air conditioning use. in transportation sector, designing walkable, bike-centric cities and ones with renewable powered mass transit can greatly reduce transportation energy. In the construction sector, we really need to start using more recycled, low embodied carbon materials, less concrete and steel, reducing land disturbance, and using renewable powered construction machinery and maintenance methods, and reducing transportation of materials. All of those will help until technology can give us other choices. In the waste sector, composting organic waste for reuse as soil amendments can reduce methane in landfills, and sewage treatment systems can use wetlands and other irrigated lands as tertiary treatment of wastewater. And in agriculture, management to increase soil carbon can reduce the high fertilizer use, which also has production emissions that are very high as well. And it also will help reduce fertilizer leaching into the groundwater and flowing through rivers and creating dead zones in the ocean as they flow out, which is what's happening right now. So in the wildlands, the lands that are not developed by man, land management techniques and vegetative buffers in urban wildland interface, for example, can reduce wildfire risk and keep ecosystems from burning beyond normal healthy intensity and frequency. These are just a few examples. When we look at the way nature-based solutions can help to remove CO2, we can look at three categories. One is the preservation, restoration, design, and management of the land to increase Earth's biomass and sequester carbon in the soil. And in wildlands, preserving high-yielding carbon sink ecosystems is the most effective way to remove CO2. When it comes to then comes restoration of native ecosystems, especially those that provide high carbon sinks, and managing existing land to better sequester carbon, such as forests that are at increased risk of wildfire. In man-made landscapes, in the agriculture area, we can replace conventional farming practices with ones that are regenerative, that use cover crops, manure compost, perennial crops, biochar, continuous rotation, livestock integration technique, reducing tillage, improving microbial carbon use efficiency, improving nitrogen management, and reducing erosion. Anyway, the list goes on, increasing trees in pasture land and windbreaks. In suburban areas, denser nature-filled urban areas to accommodate more people and avoid suburban sprawl will help the development of natural productive carbon sequestration, will help us not develop the land that is naturally productive carbon sinks. And cities could become denser, but at the same time, they could be more nature-filled spaces with roof gardens, vertical planting surfaces, bioswales, urban farms, urban forests with long-lived trees suitable to their location, more parkland, and greener schools. Transportation corridors are also, and waste sites can be improved by restoring ecosystems and planting trees along roads, drainage systems, and waste sites. And land developed for renewable energy, including mining sites for materials, solar and wind farms, can be done more sensitively by incorporating healthy ecosystems such as grasslands around solar arrays and wind farms and incorporating wind farms in agriculture land with sheep grazing for maintenance and ecological mitigation of mining sites. In flood-prone areas that are along the coast, they can be transitioned to more natural areas and parkland, planting living shorelines, barrier islands, and reefs that sequester carbon. So the other category is biochar. Heating biomass to convert carbon into a long-lived state of biochar for use as soil amendment can improve soil fertility, water absorption capacity of the soils, and speed up sequestering carbon in the soil. And harvesting biomass to create long-lived products would be another category by transforming biomass that might otherwise burn and decay, such as excess biomass from forests that need to be thinned to lower the risk of non-ecological wildfires, and trees that are destroyed in storms, flooding, drought, or disease, and turn them into long-lived products such as building materials, furniture, and other usable products that or fuels, if you can figure out a way to have zero emissions from them, which I'll leave it to the engineers to work on that problem. So even as we get to carbon neutral by 2050, we'll be adapting to climate change's effects for many decades, probably, perhaps even centuries. So some landscapes are more resilient to climate effects, and we need to purposely learn from this and use these solutions. For areas that are prone to storms and flooding, creating more wetlands, living shorelines of seagrass, mangroves, forests, clam and oyster habitats can also help reduce storm surges and coastal flooding when designed with care. And resilience to inland flooding involve watershed management, studying the whole watershed and capturing, slowing, and directing stormwater better using freshwater marshes, ponds, rivers, and improving soil percolation with healthy soils and permeable pavements. For sea level rise, creating barrier reefs, barrier islands, living shorelines, wetlands, tidal marshes, mangroves, designing floodable land uses such as parks and recreation areas along coastlines can help. And in areas where there's increase in heat, often the urban areas heat up faster, so increased heat, especially in urban areas, can be helped using green roofs, urban trees and forests, urban forests, more vegetation, light-colored pavements and buildings to reflect heat. And as far as wildfire goes, better forest management, early warning, wildfire detection systems, fire-resilient buildings and surrounding landscapes, land planning with managed living fire buffer zones can really be a help. And for drought and water supply, stormwater capture with filtration using native plants in bioswales, wetlands, rivers, beds, and pond retention systems are just one example. And I'm only giving you a few examples here. For food security, hopefully regenerative farming will be able to increase productivity. Urban and local farms will reduce transportation and increase availability at their source. And planting edible landscapes are another possibility, using nut trees in forests, for example. So the Brazil nut trees in the Amazon are being cleared for traditional cropland when they could be cultivated for a high energy source of food. And walnuts, chestnuts, pecans can be used in forests in the US, for example, instead of clearing for cropland, or in addition to the agriculture. Along the coast, restoring clam and oyster habitats offshore can create more of a food source. These are just a few examples. Now, increasing biodiversity is very much integral with addressing the climate crisis. It's not just about losing some species that most of us don't really interact with. I have a good analogy. So in urban areas, for example, people are running around doing all kinds of job functions that help each other and keep the system functioning. However, when teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or dock workers go on strike, the system crumbles. So I remember living through a sanitation worker strike in the 1980s in New York City. And bags of trash started piling up along sidewalks to the point where pedestrians were walking in the streets. And rats were feasting on this new food source. Their population started growing. If the strike had persisted, it would have stopped the flow of vehicular traffic as well as pedestrian, and the rat population would have outnumbered people. Disease would have followed, and the urban system might have totally collapsed. So this is happening in the natural world. When bee populations, for example, diminish, so does pollination of flowers and the production of seeds, which regenerate plants and feed a whole chain of animal species. So one species decline can have a cascading effect within the whole ecosystem. And if ecosystems decline, the earth will lose its ability to sequester CO2 in the land. In many cases, emissions of CO2 from the land will increase from both biodiversity loss and the effects of climate change. So as landscape architects, we collaborate more and more with ecologists and soil scientists, as well as engineers, to do our job better. And these are the goals that we are trying to address to help promote biodiversity. We're trying to create and enhance restore habitat. We're planting native plants and removing invasive species, enhancing wildlife connectivity, that's land connections, and even better connections for flying for birds and insects, with native plants in man-made landscapes, and installing wildlife bridges over transportation barriers, and then paying attention using wildlife-friendly vegetation management. So now I'm going to get to the fun part, case studies. As we discussed earlier, humans have heavily modified more than 50% of the Earth's land surface. At the current rate of land transformation, particularly agriculture land, it's just unsustainable. And now I'd like to show you case studies of projects that have won recognition and awards from the American Society of Landscape Architects. They represent only a few examples of the many made landscape uses on the planet and how we can achieve through design the multiple goals of greenhouse gas emission reduction, CO2 removal, adaptation to climate change, and enhancing biodiversity. And please forgive me in advance for reading from my notes because I want to accurately represent those projects using their own words as much as possible. They're not projects that I've done personally. So for the first land use category, farms, agriculture is the #1 area for man-made landscapes and growing, and much of the farmland around the world consists of thousands of acres of monocrops fed with artificially manufactured fertilizer, incurring significant greenhouse gas emissions in their own production, polluting groundwater, causing dead zones in the ocean, and depleting stored soil carbon, which gets released into the air. These farms are also located far from the consumer, incurring high transportation emissions as well and waste. So this project by Nelson Bird Walls Landscape Architects created a master plan for a 262-acre model sustainable agriculture landscape in central Virginia that would protect soil health, promote environmental conservation, and yield organic food source close to the consumer. Conventional farming methods had left this property damaged. It lacked biodiversity, it was had degraded riparian habitat and forests that were unable to regenerate due to invasive plants. The goal of the master plan was to create a new balance between agricultural production and ecological preservation. The plan includes space for cattle rotation, 15 acres of wetland, a riparian corridor, and it improves the management, restoring forests and wetlands, protected wildlife corridors, and insectaries to increase the number of pollinators. So in collaboration with SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, they brought in a team of 17 university field scientists to do a BioBlitz exercise. And the team spent 3 days creating ecological baseline that cataloged animal population, plant life, soil quality. Temperature sensors were installed throughout the site to monitor microclimates. And we'd love to have soil carbon detection equipment at low cost, but that was not used, but it would be really helpful for engineers to develop that. The firm crafted, with the information that they had, a master plan that protected soil health, promoted conservation and biodiversity, and grows organic produce. So for areas that involve landfill restoration, this is an example called the Alpine Garden designed by Zscape, which was once a village dump site and transformed into a model habitat restoration with outdoor environmental education and a cultural center in Lijiang, China. This 15-acre project, 6 hectares, is designed to function as a self-sustaining alpine ecosystem. It also features a stormwater system to safeguard Bashad, the World Heritage town that was prone to flooding. So here are some examples of the before and after of the site. Here's a diagram showing how the watershed functioned and how by they were redirecting the flow of water to mitigate flood hazards and recharging stormwater and using the snowmelt for agricultural irrigation. And with soil and vegetation restoration, they were very mindful of restoring biodiversity and using materials from the land itself, nearby recycled roof timbers and on-site rock to construct the new project. Here's another category of transferring obsolete infrastructure. So we're going to have a lot of this in the future. And here's an example where Sasaki was tasked with transforming the former Athens airport, 650 acres, into an urban park with the goal of being carbon neutral within 35 years and then carbon negative for 45 more years afterwards. Ellington Park provides spaces for recreation, civic celebrations within an oasis of biodiversity. The landscape architect-led team took a holistic climate action perspective for Greece's first green infrastructure project, rigorously researching local ecosystem, carbon sequestration abilities, water systems, local industrial ecology, and material reuse in a massive scale. So when we do these projects as landscape architects, we make a lot of design decisions along the way. And we've used science and technology to prepare tools of our own. One is called Pathfinder that Pamela Conrad developed, and Carbon Conscience that Chris Hardy and others at Sasaki developed, which helps us estimate our carbon footprint during the planning and design process of these projects. So we calculate the embodied carbon to construct the project. That includes the materials and the equipment to build the project, and the operational carbon of maintaining it for years to come, and provide opportunities. So these tools provide us with opportunities to early on make decisions of how to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions during construction and offset them with carbon storage capacity in the soils and biomass. And in this project, the original method of construction would be to demolish the acres and acres of airport runway and remove them and put them in landfills somewhere and then pour new concrete. Well, by doing methods that I'll talk about in more detail, Sasaki was able to reduce the embodied carbon 45% on this project. Here's an example of how they took the vast amount of concrete from the airport, from the existing runways, and designed it in a way that it could be reused on site and playfully tell a story of the site's past, reducing embodied carbon and honoring what used to be hidden, but at the same time creating a very green and biodiverse system. So for operational carbon, the emissions expended to maintain the park, this project incorporated photovoltaic solar energy to power all electric maintenance fleet and services for park maintenance. Here's a diagram of how the biodiversity was enhanced in the area. To the right, there's the mountainous areas where there are wildlands, and how developing the area in red creates a link, a connection between the mountains to the sea for bird life. And eventually there may be land connections that would help with land connections to the sea. This restoration ecology maximizes the co-benefits of carbon sequestration using living biomass and soil carbon, and renews regional biodiversity. Here's another example of over 3.3 million locally sourced plants will be selected for their habitat value and ecological services and adaptability to the site's alkaline soils. Here are the benefits from this project with careful design. So another category of land on the earth is brownfields and abandoned land. So, in this bustling urban heart of Bangkok, a former tobacco factory was transformed by Turnscape into a low maintenance regenerative system that is climate resilient, filters contaminated water, provides much needed wildlife habitat, and provides the largest public recreational space for residents of downtown Bangkok. The project offers a replicable modular approach to urban engineering that can transform the lifeless concrete paved ground into a resilient living ecosystem. So it increases, so in this diagram, you see the full extent of green space in this heavily urban area. It transformed it into a porous green sponge supporting living system to evolve spontaneously. And it constructed wetland features that include an amphitheater designed with a shallow perimeter and deep center to flood during the rainy season. So it adds a flood control benefit as well. So now other areas of opportunity in urban locations are green roofs. So the most sustainable building is the one that's already built. Horse Shroud designed and repurposed an old iconic Chicago post office, leveraging the building's vast roof area as a design asset. The Meadow, it's called, has become the nation's largest private rooftop garden, enabling the space to become a park unto itself. It's 3.5 acres, and tenants actively and passively use the space daily to connect with nature amidst the urban backdrop. Weddings, conferences, and community events are all hosted in this space. It's designed with sustainability in mind, and the rooftop uses innovative soil mixes, stormwater filtration. They planted 40,000 or more plants. They have bee colonies, and there's more to provide a formerly desolate urban area with 3.5 acres of new, richly planted green space. You can see sustainable materials were used. And this is what it looks like. And you're in downtown Chicago. You're in Chicago. School campuses are another example of opportunities. University of Arizona created a classroom on top of a parking lot. 10 landscape architects transformed the landscape around the building with a paved gray field they took a paved gray field and turned it into an outdoor classroom and scenic gathering place for students and professors. The Sonoran Landscape Lab collects approximately 230 gallons of stormwater runoff per year from the building and efficiently irrigates the landscape. The Sonoran Landscape Laboratory turned a site that generated polluted stormwater runoff into a model of sustainable design using green infrastructure to retain stormwater and recycle it into wetlands and native gardens. So transportation corridors are a big dominant factor, not just in cities, but even in wildland areas. Here's an example of West Florissant Avenue in St. Louis, where the county retained landscape architecture firm SWT Design to further develop a master plan's vision for Great Street that would improve economic conditions, provide pedestrians, cyclists, vehicles with a safer path, better manage stormwater, that increases green space along the corridor by 70%. It reduces impervious surfaces by 34%. It increases tree canopy cover by 19% in the near term and 26% in the long term. And the plan would also reduce energy use by 30% through the use of LED lighting. So this project can reduce greenhouse gas emissions with pedestrian and bicycle transit. It cools cities with urban forests. It increases sequestration of CO2 into the soil. It enhances clean water and reduces flooding.
Ronnie, so,
Yeah.
we are at 40 minutes now, and how many more slides do you have? And sorry to stop you.
Oh,
And
I'll be done in 10 minutes for sure.
okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for the reminder. And it promotes biodiversity by increasing planting habitats and connectivity. So this is a project in Boston, urban coastal land. It's an example of the challenge that cities have along the coast from sea level rise and storm surges. And East Boston is at significant risk of this problem. And they predict that sea levels, storm surges will rise 9 inches in 2030 and up to 40 during major storm events in 2070. And you can see in this diagram, the area of flooding is pretty huge. The solution that they came up with is one that climate-ready Boston and Strauss landscape urbanism, along with Kleinfelder and One Architecture and Urbanism, prepared the first neighborhood-specific initiative that offers a network of landscape-based defenses. The parks and natural buffers along the coast of East Boston protect inland homes and businesses from flooding. And the cost that they predict that they need to invest will actually have returns of 4 to 5-fold in the future. In areas of renewable energy infrastructure, here's an example of a site on the campus of University of Buffalo. Hood Design Studio sited a 1/4-mile array of photovoltaic panels in a way that allows students to walk right up to the solar panels, nestled in regenerated wetlands and meadows. And they use open spaces as classrooms to learn about the potential of renewable energy. This array generates enough kilowatts to power 700 on-campus apartments. It saves them $100,000 in electric costs, and it means 400 fewer tons of greenhouse gas emissions entering the atmosphere each year. So finally, my last case study is wildlife crossings. Roadways can split apart wildlife habitats and break down natural systems and put lives of humans and wildlife at risk. So 1 to 2 million wildlife vehicular collisions occur in the US each year, costing $8 billion in accident-related damages. Collisions with deer claim the lives of 200 people each year in the US. And to create low-cost model for improving the safety of people and wildlife and reconnected fragments of wildlife habitat, the Center for Large Landscape Conservation launched a competition, and Michael Van Voltenberg Associates, Inc. and HNTB won the competition with their nature wildlife bridge, a single span design that can be constructed of prefabricated concrete pieces. So case studies in landscape performance benefits can include all of these categories. And the Landscape Architecture Foundation compiled a list of 200 or more case studies. Here are some of the links. The first one will link you to 200 more case studies that you can take a closer look at of projects that have climate benefits. And there are economic studies showing the benefits rather than just the cost of. So finally, I'd like to end with this slide. We're relying on research and technology tools to help us do our work. And continuing, the leaders in our field are trying to use the most current science and technology developments when we design these man-made landscapes. But we strive to continue to improve the performance of our work and rely on your developing of science and technologies to help us. And I hope to inspire continued collaboration with the IEEE and other science and engineering organizations and landscape architecture. But here are some areas of research and technology that would really help us do our job better. We need continuing perfecting the technology for mapping greenhouse gas emissions and tracking them, and improve modeling to predict our adaptation needs. We need to measure, record, and verify with tools that will measure carbon in the soils in an economical way and in biomass, and provide a better understanding of soil type, plant type, and soil carbon sequestration potentials that we can use in our work. We need to understand and catalog site-specific soil microbes and their role in sequestering carbon in the soil, and imaging of dry landscapes at risk of fire, and systems that will detect wildfire in wildlands and provide early warning. Imaging and documenting land use patterns, technologies that reduce embodied carbon in construction materials, especially steel and concrete, and also in construction equipment, reducing their emissions. We also want to find ways to, we would love if you could find a way to sequester carbon in concrete or other long-lived products. And we could use technologies that reduce waste in construction or convert it to energy while capturing and eliminating greenhouse gas or toxic waste byproducts to reduce landfill emissions. Also technology that repurpose biomass to things that can last a long time, 25 to 100 years, and help generate energy with low or zero emissions. This will buy us some time. And reducing carbon footprint of transportation in materials, lowering the carbon footprint in making biochar. This is something that I know electrical engineers are working on in heating plant biomass to make biochar. The more efficient we can get that, the better, because as a soil amendment, it's great in sequestering carbon in the soil and helping soil fertility and moisture holding capacity for plants. And it makes them more resilient to climate change as well, and mitigates flooding. Tracking bird and other animal migrations to help with biodiversity assessment, and battery renewable energy technology that reduces mining of rare minerals and transporting them. And finally, AI development to aid in the information exchange between science, technology, and practitioners. This really will help us get the information that you develop faster, and we won't miss out on things, which I'm sure we we might be doing. Thank you very much for allowing me to introduce you to the work that we do and try to find areas where we can collaborate and do a better job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ronnie. And we have one question. We have many questions here. And one from Charlie is that he wants to ask, what can I do in my own yard or own garden to increase carbon sequestration?
Okay. Well, that's a difficult question, not knowing what your garden looks like, but if you're in an urban area and if you're in an area where you can use native plants and you can leave the leaf litter on the ground and let it decompose naturally and sort of take a clue from how nature functioned before, that would be great. The one area of carbon sequestration in the soil is something that we need a lot more science on. There are soil microorganisms that break down the carbon that allow the carbon to be sequestered in the soil. And it's really hard to know what your soil is like. There's so little information that we as landscape architects have about the microbes in the soil. We're hoping that this whole area of science takes off. Fungi are, we know less about the soil under our feet, I think, than we do about our oceans. And it's so important to understand the science of what's happening to sequester carbon in the soil. And but, until we know more, planting native plants, getting rid of pavement, allowing the soils to regenerate as best possible by adding compost are just some things you could do in your own yard. I hope that answers the question.
Okay,
Yes, thank you.
thank you. And there are two questions from Andrea Fadiga, but unfortunately, I cannot see them. So I will let Andrea to ask. Andrea, are you there? Yeah.
Hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So my question was more regarded industrial areas, industrial facilities. You gave first of all, thanks a lot for your presentation. You gave a lot of examples on urban areas. But I would like to know a little bit more on industrial areas and industrial facilities. Thanks.
Well, there are I think when we deal with industrial waste sites, which I think that's what you're talking about, it could be a brownfield in any location. It could be urban or not, but landscape architects work with ecologists and soil scientists and try to develop projects that rehabilitate the soil. I mean, it's a real problem where we're the problem is that the soil could be very contaminated and not support plant life, in which case microbial solutions may be a promise in the future. There are some sites that are trying to use, soil scientists that are trying to use microbes to regenerate soil. I don't know much about this, but also without that kind of process, often topsoils are removed if they're contaminated and new soil brought in. It's not a very environmentally efficient way of doing it, but until we know more science on this topic, that's another option is bringing in good soils or figuring out how to get contaminated soils rehabilitated. That's number one. And then matching the plant life that will exist on the soils and in that ecosystem, and trying to restore the native system, which depends on the climate and the rainfall and, you know, everything else of the site is the way to do it. In urban areas, these sites are often remediated to be used for public recreation. In the wild areas, they're restored to their native habitat ecosystems, so that they can be back to the way they were before we destroyed them. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Ronnie. I think that is our last questions. So if that is the case, let's thank Ronnie for the last time, and so that we can move on to our next session. Thank you, Ronnie.
Okay, thank you very much.